Welcome to Infused Eats, the gourmet cooking show where everything is infused with cannabis. Especially me, your host, Matt Lamb. Today, in celebration of the 4th of July holiday, we're making red, white, and blueberry cobbler. This recipe uses fresh blueberries, fresh red cherries, and we're going to infuse our cannabis into clarified butter in this recipe. And then for the white, we're going to be using some ice cream for a red, white, and blueberry cobbler. This episode is sponsored by 420foodclub.com. 420foodclub.com is a gourmet infused food service delivering in Los Angeles and Orange County. If you'd like to learn more to sign up for free, please check out 420foodclub.com. Now for the ingredients of this recipe, you can go to infusedeats.com. Of course, we're going to have them listed there for free, but I'll go through each item as we get to it as well. The first item we're going to be using is cannabis. And for this, you can use, I recommend anywhere from 3.5 to 7 grams. That's from 1/8 to 1/4 ounce. And for this case, I'm actually using a blend. I'm using about 3 grams of a sativa and 2 grams of an OG or an indica. But you can use whatever combination of cannabis that you want. I ended up using about 5 grams in this recipe. Of course, you're also going to want to grind your cannabis. So that'll be the first step. So take your cannabis and grind it and put it into an oven-safe bowl. And you can use a bowl with a lid, or you can use foil on it if you want to try to hold down the smell, because in this step, when we activate the THC, we are going to definitely smell up the house. So once you have that in your oven-safe bowl, you can cover it or not. I don't really have to worry about it here, so I didn't cover it. Put that in the oven, and we're only going to decarb for 12 minutes at 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you might be wondering in this recipe why we're only decarbing for 12 minutes, and that's a good thing to talk about while we clarify our butter. So I'm cubing my butter, I'm putting it in a thick bottom frying pan, and I'm putting it on medium heat, and I'm gonna bring that up so that I can render out the milk solids. Now the reason I'm only decarbing for 12 minutes is because this recipe uses a crust that's on top of the cobbler, and that crust is what's going to have most of the cannabis in it. And I don't want it directly exposed to the heat, converting my THC into CBN, because that'll make us sleepy. So I'm only half decarbing in front, because I know that the recipe is actually going to decarb while it cooks. So I've clarified my butter, and one way I like to filter out the rest of the milk solids after scooping out what I can is I use my trusty old Pyrex or any kind of heat-proof container, and I use a rubber band to fasten a coffee filter on top. Then I pour the butter through that and let that filter out slowly. Maybe takes about 10 minutes for it all to cool down enough so that I can squeeze it out with my hands. And if you can't wait that long, you could also use a couple of spoons and squeeze it out between the spoons to protect you from burning your hands. But once you're done and you have all the milk solids out, you're going to have that nice, rich butter oil that we're looking for that looks like popcorn butter. We'll also have just over a half a cup, which is what we need here. So we want to start out with a half a cup plus a couple of tablespoons. We're going to put that into a double boiler. I'm using a Pyrex dish inside of a regular saucepan with a little bit of water in it. That water is going to be left boiling. And then now I'm putting my cannabis that has activated or half activated that after that 12-minute decarb. It's a little lighter than it would normally be when we do a recipe when it's fully decarbed. Okay, I'm just going to mix that in, and this is going to be our infusion process. And the longer you let it infuse, the better it's going to be as far as potency goes. I'm going to recommend 1 to 2 hours. And just let that infuse, stir it every so often. I don't like to use a lid on this because the condensation drops water down in it, and I don't really prefer that. So just, if you can, just leave the lid off of it if you don't really have to worry about the smell. So it's been a little over an hour. I went about an hour and 15 minutes on mine. And I got a real nice dark color green with my 5 grams of cannabis in there. Now I don't want any plant material in my recipe in the cobbler, so I'm going to go ahead and strain that out through a fine mesh filter. You could also use cheesecloth for this step. You could also, again, use the coffee filter. It may take a little bit longer. All right, so we're just about finished with our first big step, which is to make our infused butter. There we go, but it's a little bit hot now, so what I'm going to do is while I move on to the next step is I'm going to put that in the refrigerator and let that cool off for a little while. And while my butter is cooling off, I'm going to go ahead and move on to prepping my cherries, which can be a long and tedious process. But I'm going to show you the method that I use, which I think speeds it up as best as possible. So first I've washed and I've taken the stems off the cherries. And now I'm going through and I'm cutting off just about 1/3 of the cherry right at the side of the pit that's inside of it. So I'm taking the knife, I'm finding the pit and splitting it to one side. And I do about 10 or 12 of them up at one time, and then I come through and I use my thumb and I pop the pit out. I discard the pit, and then that leaves the other half of the cherry to just drop into my bowl. And it still takes a long time to do it, and I'm doing about 1.5 pounds or almost 2 pounds of cherries here. So just stay with it and get it done, because using fresh cherries is a lot better, a lot tastier than using some kind of canned ingredient. So stay with it, and when you're done, you're gonna have a big, beautiful bowl full of cherries with no pits in it, ready to go into our cobbler. So I'm gonna keep those in the refrigerator so that they stay nice and chilled while I prepare the rest of the ingredients. And the other ingredients are the blueberries. I went ahead and made sure that I washed those good and took all the stems out. You know, the little bitty tiny stems on the blueberries. You don't want anybody biting into that. And now I've taken my can of butter out of the refrigerator just long enough to use it to butter my bowl. And you can use a casserole dish or whatever kind of dish that you want here. I kind of opted for a kind of a narrow, tall bowl, which was a little bit of a mistake, and we'll get to that a little bit later. It turned out great, but I could have used a better bowl. Or I would have used a shallower but bigger round bowl so it didn't get so close to the top of the oven. But what you would do is alternate putting in about half of the cherries, then about half the blueberries, then again half the cherries, half the blueberries, so that they're nice and mixed up. And we're almost finished with the topping. It doesn't take very many ingredients in the toppings. Now we're taking a lime and zesting it. You could use a lemon here, but I think a lime is a little less tart than a lemon. And we already have a lot of tart ingredients. Cherries are tart, blueberries are tart. So I'm using a lime. I'm zesting an entire lime. Then I'm going to go ahead and split the lime, and I'm going to juice the lime right down into the top of those other fruits. Of course, this is a cobbler. You are welcome to mix up the fruit and use whatever kind of cobbler that you want. You could make an apple cobbler, peach cobbler. You could just use cherries or just blueberries, but I'm making a red, white, and blue cobbler. That's why I'm using these specific ingredients. You could probably also use strawberries and blueberries and also have a very delicious and red, white, and blue cobbler. Okay, but I've just mixed those up with my hands a little bit just to distribute the citrus. And I'm going to set that in the refrigerator while we finish and make our topping. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm adding salt. It was a half a teaspoon of salt and then 2 teaspoons of baking powder into my all-purpose flour. Now, if you have self-rising flour, you can omit the salt and the baking powder and just use the flour in that case. Okay, and now I'm also adding in my 1 1/3 cup of white sugar. Give that a nice little whisk to incorporate it. And now I've got my can of butter, which is still a liquid. It's just started to cool off enough where it was barely starting to thicken, but you still want it to be a liquid, just not hot enough to cook anything. And that's going to make it a lot easier to mix it into our flour and sugar mixture. So you see I'm just using a little floppy end silicone spatula, and it's working fine just to incorporate this. It took about 5 minutes of working that in, and eventually the butter worked in to the flour and to the sugar, and it became a very even, almost a meal, like a cornmeal type of crumbly mixture, which is perfect. Okay, now we're going to add in our milk. This is 2/3 a cup of whole milk. So there's 1/3 going in, and then we'll add another 1/3 cup of milk. I love how that turns out. I kind of imagined it would be green, but it turned this nice light honey color. It's really pretty. So now we're using our milk, and we're going to use the milk to whisk that into a lumpy, but a little bit smoother than this, but it's fine if it's lumpy. It's not going to be a really slick, smooth batter, but it's going to be more of a batter now. Okay, so that's it for the topping. So we have our topping made, and we have our filling made on the bottom here, so we're ready to combine the two together. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just adding that topping down into our fillings. Just using a spatula to dump it on there, and then we're going to use the same spatula to smooth it out so that it's even. And here's where we come into the problem. You see the pan that I used was not really quite big enough, and it comes all the way to the lip. And that's not that great. But anyway, if you had at least a lip at the top of about 1 inch, you'd be in a great, perfect shape. It's going to be fine though, but don't worry, but it would have been better that way. Now we're taking another 1/4 cup of white sugar, and we're coating that whole top with an unimaginable amount of sugar. Just pile it on there. Use the whole 1/4 cup like it calls. And then also now we're going to dredge it with water. I'm just using a spoon, and make sure that you get everything saturated from lip to lip on the pan. And so you have like a little ponding, a little puddling of water on top. And don't worry, that's going to be fine. Like I said, if I had used a big enough pan, it would have been better. Okay, so now the baking, we're going to first put it in an oven preheated at 375. We're going to leave it in there for 15 minutes at 375, then lower the temperature down to 300 so that we can cook it for another hour and let that bottom melt and cook all together. And then to keep our top from burning, if you had problems like I do with a small oven, you could use a piece of foil or parchment on top to keep the top from getting too burnt. Mine got a little browner than I wanted, but to be honest with you, it turned out nearly perfect. That beautiful sugar caramelized on top. It's a very crunchy, hard top. The inside is kind of a doughy, gooey like you want with a cobbler. And I can't wait to crack into this. But one thing you want to do is you want to give it about 30 minutes to cool off before you want to crack into it, if you can wait that long. So be sure you do that. And you can hear the top has got that nice crispy cracking top that you want. Now I have already had the opportunity to try some of this, and I'm really glad that I decarbed for only 12 minutes because the high that I got from this one was one of the best yet for edibles that I've made. It got you real high right after, probably about 30 minutes after you start feeling it, the warm feelings coming into your face. I stayed high all the way up until I went to bed, but I didn't sleep all groggy and wake up all groggy. It was great. This episode is sponsored by 420foodclub.com, which is a gourmet food service delivering in Los Angeles and Orange County, California. Please check out 420foodclub.com to learn more about that service. I hope you enjoyed this recipe for red, white, and blueberry cobbler. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe to RuffHouse Studios for more cannabis culture videos made just for you. This is Matt, your cannabis-infused host, wishing you a happy 4th of July, and thank you for watching.